actions. Right, so today we are going to move on to, finally, after the Sixth Ecumenical Council, to the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And the good news is there are only 20 canons for this one, so we may be able to get through most of them today. Right, the first canon of the Seventh Ecumenical Council is one, basically, that is affirming that the canons are the testimonies of God. That is likened to the commandments of God. They are not just simply ecclesiastical discipline or rules of men. They are actually inspired by the Holy Spirit, and they are the will of God. They are the testimonies of God. Why testimonies? Because they show forth the way that God is, what he wants for us. Because the canons are ultimately about protecting us to live as Christ, as the church, as a body of Christ. So the canons are ultimately a reflection of what it is to be united to Christ, to behave as the church in Christ, the proper ways. So it ties back in that way to God. So, and if we are to teach other canons or things contrary, not only is it to disobey God's commandments, it is equivalent to disobeying the gospel, teaching another gospel. So if people teach other canons than which we've received for the church, they are actually teaching another gospel. Why? Because the gospel is not just simply a statement of intellectual faith, I believe in such and such. It is also a way of life, a way of behavior. We become united to Christ not just by faith, but in the way we behave in all our activities. So Christ is realized in the tradition, not only teachings, but in activity, our behavior as well. And so if we teach a different behavior, Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then we are teaching a different Christ. So if you're teaching different canons, you are effectively teaching a different behavior, a different church, and a different Christ. So that is why they're kept strong. And if whoever they anathematize, excommunicate, they excommunicate, depose, we should depose. That's not to say that we don't exercise them with a certain economy, but we have to make discretion always in applying them. Nevertheless, we should obey them and follow them as the law of God, as the commandments of God. So that is the first canon, basically saying, and they stay firm and rigid. So when the fathers talk about the canons, they always affirm the ones that have always come. They don't say we never change them, we never modify them. So if anyone starts saying, oh, the canons got changed, they got obliterated, got removed, no. But your fathers never do that. The canons stay firm. However, occasionally the fathers will qualify a canon because of a certain circumstances. One of the classic ones of these is you have to have 2 councils in a year, the bishops. And they said, well, because of troubles and barbarians and stuff, you could just get away with 1. You must do at least 1. And so that's a qualification. Properly, you still do 2. But there's a qualification that if necessity comes, they allowed them to do 1. Because this is a strict canon for the bishop's activities. So they had to make another canon to give the qualification. Many canons, we can, to a certain degree, exercise the priest. I can give a certain allowance or not excommunicate you immediately for a certain event, so that there is some discretion there. But when it comes to these higher level for the priesthood and order and structure, they have to be kept more strictly in these matters. So anyway, that's the first canon, just basically saying that the canons are the testimonies of God. If you teach otherwise, other canons, throw them out, stop them, you are teaching a different gospel. Right, the canon 2 is such that whenever they ordain a bishop, the bishop should be one, or in truth, or presbyter, who meditates on the canons day and night, as well on the Psalms. He should know the Psalms, he should know the Scriptures, and he should know the canons, and he should be one who searches them out diligently. So he doesn't just know them vaguely, he should know them in detail before he's ordained. He has to be one who is interested in this. All our bishops being ordained should be ones who know the canons. If you ask the bishop about a canon, he should tell you what the canon is. He should be able to tell you in the nuances and all interpretations and understandings of it, when it's applied, when it's not applied. This is the expectation. Very few, unfortunately, now are being pushed to this, and knowing the Psalter. And some people say haven't memorized the Psalter, but if you go back in the old days of the church, we used to say the Psalter fully every week, most bishops, if they come from a monastic background. So they should know it fairly well, not necessarily memorize every psalm, but they should have a very good understanding of the contents of the Psalter. And of course, all the scriptures, they need to be studying these things so that they can apply it to the people correctly, the Word of God. So that is the expectation of the bishops. And Dionysius the Areopagite says that the essentiality of our prelacy is the words taught by God. As a priesthood, one of our main things is to teach the Word of God, to help you to understand the traditions of the church by teaching it. And so we should know it, so that we can preach it and teach it to you properly, to help you to understand it so you can live your lives according to the way of God. So that's Canon 2. Canon 3 is that bishops and presbyters and deacons are not to be made by civil authorities. This is quite important. The church determines its own leadership, and so whoever bishops are ordained by the bishops of the church. The presbyter is ordained as appointed by the bishop, and properly speaking, the consent of all the presbyters. Each presbyter comes on. The bishop shouldn't be running around making presbyters of his own will. He should do so only with the consent of the presbyters of the diocese, ideally with all their consent. And this is a safeguarding thing, because if they've all got to know him and who he is, then it stops someone sneaking up to the bishop, I want to be made this, and putting pressure on him and getting ordained. If all the presbyters go, whoa, what are you ordaining him? I know him, he's a little troublemaker from back there. So this is safeguarding, and unfortunately, again, the bishop is not doing these things. But anyway, the point of this canon is that the civil authorities shouldn't be doing that. The church authority has to be kept distinct from church civil authority. As a member of the church, as a priest, I'm not allowed to have a civil government position, rule on the civil government. The authority of the church must stay distinct from the authority of the state. Ideally, the state should follow the laws of the church as part of the state. In the Roman Empire, the church says this is our laws of the ecumenical councils, this is the canons. The state treats them as its own law, but the church shouldn't interfere with the ruling of the state, so it doesn't collapse into becoming secular rules, getting tied up with Christ says, what's your inheritance to me? That's not the point of the church. We teach canons and the rules of the church to bring you to Christ, to unite you. But the worldly, secular matters, that's not our problem. And we don't want to get involved in that because it starts to undermine the church authority to point to Christ. And also we don't want to live in a theocracy where the church orders every detail of life, and then it collapses into a worldly organisation because it's dealing with worldly matters. Instead of what's important to go to heaven, it becomes focused on the earth. And it starts to control people. We have to have a certain amount of freedom in the state for people to be heretics or unbelievers. We don't want the church, everyone to be regarded. You can only come into the state if you are equivalent of being able to be in church and take communion. Now, the state can have a certain level where people in the state have that church commitment, but there needs to be a little bit more freedom there, which church can't allow. The bishops of the church can't allow. So there have to be distinct standards. Being a citizen in the state is a distinct level than being a member of the church, even if the two are very closely aligned to each other. And also, we don't want the state to be controlling the church, because then all secular policies, secular ideas. And this is what happened when Protestants came in, that the church became this sort of function of the state. The Anglican church is a problem with this. The king is the head of, is the supreme governor of the church. And at the moment, a civil servant appoints the bishops effectively. They recommend the bishops who get appointed by, they actually get ordained by the church, but the appointment is actually recommended by the civil service. And that's why you see it keeps increasingly, the state becomes more secularized, etc. Then you get secular bishops put into place who reflect the teaching of the state. Not that. No, the two authorities have to be very, very much kept apart. Anyway, this is what this canon is saying, is that the church is opposed to anyone being appointed by the state. If that's so, they should be defrocked or removed. The next one, the canon 4, is... wait a second, I'll just... Oh, the next one is we should never be ordained as priests or presbyters for money. The bishop shouldn't be ordained. We Simon there, in other words, it's just another canon against them. It's not right. We'll give you some money to be ordained. No. We're ordained because we are worthy of or suitable for preaching the gospel and a way of life for our teachings. We're not ordained because I paid money to the bishop. This is a very rapid corruption, but it's a gift from God as well. It is not be bought with money, and this is just basically reinforcing the anti-Simonary thing that you're not to be ordaining people for money. Canon 5. It is deadly sin. I'll just read out first, but when any sinners remain incorrigible, unchanging. But what is worse than this happens if they insist upon rising up against piety and truth, preferring mammon, money, to obedience to God, and failing to cling fast to his canonical ordinances. Among those persons, God is not the Lord, unless he is, by any chance, they have humiliated and again come sober enough to see their own mistake. So we need to approach Christ with a contrite heart and remission of sins. Again, this is very much about money. Another canon, country money. Sorry, it's quite long here, and they finally get to a point halfway through. But again, it's just ordination for money, etc. But it's also we must obey the canons, and we must follow the canons. The Seventh Ecumenical Council is quite strong on this because when they had iconoclasm, a lot of it behind that was a sort of anti-canonical thing, disobeying the canons, not keeping the traditions of the church. They threw out many other things. It's not just icons. There was a lot of other traditional practices of the church they were neglecting or speaking against. And it's like sometimes in modern times we have modernists and stuff who push away the canons. They try to teach new customs, new ideas. Oh, it doesn't matter about the canons. We don't need to follow those. We do it this way because we love or whatever. And they pushed aside these things. And this is actually the core of the problem at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, behind the icon. So in modern days we'll say, well, we believe in icons, but they will do the other things which is denied here, which is keeping the traditions, keeping the canons, etc. And so we're full foul of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. We've got a big problem with that nowadays. So again, this is another canon basically dealing with money. The next one, Canon 6, is the one where it's talking about the bishops meeting together twice a year. So it's just another one reinforcing that it should be done. And if it's been prevented, they're saying, look, smack them on the hand for doing that. Seventh Ecumenical Council said you could do it once a year by necessity, but properly we should be doing it twice a year. Anyway, that's a canon on that. Canon 7. Paul the Apostle says some men's sins are plainly evident, whereas those others follow afterwards. Sin therefore will be committed in advance, other sins follow them. It's just saying that precisely as they've removed the face of the venerable icons from the church, they have also abandoned certain other customs which must be renewed in accordance with both the written and unwritten law. They must prevail. So again, this is just reinforcing that point. Not only was icons, there are other customs of the church which were being put aside. This one is particularly important. If any venerable temples, therefore, that have been consecrated without holy relics of martyrs, when we have an altar, we must put relics of the martyrs in them. And they're opposing the relics of the martyrs also. And so when we have an altar, we must put relics in. And as a priest, when I do a service, I have an anti-mincin. And I have relics in the anti-mincin. So that it's a consecrated altar. The anti-mention is instead of a table, it is an altar. Nowadays, the people are talking about it as a cloth, saying the bishop gives you permission. No. It's an altar table. It's a portable altar table in the form of a cloth. And as an altar table, it must have relics of martyrs in it. And so this canon here is forbidding anyone to consecrate a table without relics. And an anti-mention should also always have relics in it, because it's instead of the altar table. The only time an anti-mention doesn't have to have relics is if it's on top of an altar table which has got relics actually in it, on the consecrated altar. So you don't need relics in an anti-mention used on top of a consecrated altar. There's no need for it. But otherwise, if it's given to priests like myself, I must have an anti-mention with the relics of the saints in it, otherwise I can't do the liturgy. Unfortunately, in a certain place in the church now, increasingly there's some books going out, not all anti-mentions have relics, and they're stopping doing this in a lot of places. They're not putting relics in some of the churches. This is a big problem nowadays. It's probably true more amongst the ecumenical patriarchate and Cyprus and stuff, where it's more of a problem. The Russians are very careful to do it. The Antiochians, as far as I know, Patriarch still does it, but among the Greek-speaking ones, there is a problem with this. And this is only recent. This is in the last 20 or 30 years, because the older ones always had relics as well. So this is a great problem. This, again, it's the whole modernism and things. Not only, they talk about icons, but we're still seeing this attack against traditions. And this is one of the things which we see now as well, sadly. But anyway, don't you worry about that too much. But this is a point of other audience there. We do have relics in our anti-mention, thanks to God. The Holy Innocents from the time of Christ. That's the relics we have in our anti-mention.
Can the anti-mentions taken away from the priest? Can somebody take, like a bishop, take away your anti-mentions?
Well, it would be to say, to do that would be to deny me be able to serve as a priest. It's like removing me from the church, going to the altar of a church. It's saying I can't serve anymore if he takes that away from me. It's like blocking me out of the church, that I couldn't go and do the liturgy. So it's effectively denying you as a ability to serve as a priest, and locking you out of the church. Because if you had a consecrated altar there, it doesn't matter if you take the anti-mention off the top. There, I can do the service still, but so the cloth isn't important in itself in the bigger tradition. It's moved towards now a permission of the bishop to serve. It's changed. That's why we're not putting the relics in, because it's moved away from being a portable altar to being a cloth that gives you permission. But they're forgetting we need to have relics to serve the liturgy and on the altar. So there's a twist in understanding of it. And so the idea of taking in the old days is meaningless. If you, the only reason you take an old portable altar from a priest is if he's no longer a priest. It's like, as I said, you're cutting him out. Nowadays, they might take it off as a punishment to see you're not permitted, like suspension. But it's in the old days, it's like you're no longer a priest to do that. So, yes, so they can ask for it back and defrock you for that. But that's effectively saying you're no longer a priest. Right, inasmuch as some people have been misled by the inferences of the religion of the Jews, have seen fit to sneer at Christ and pretending to be Christians, but secretly and clandestinely keeping Sabbath and doing other Jewish acts. Yeah, we must be careful not to follow Jewish customs like keeping Sabbath is our day of rest. Now, we do respect the Sabbath in the church. That is why Saturdays, the Sabbath day, is considered a day of, we don't fast properly. We have a liturgy in the morning. So we don't, it's not like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday during the Great Fast. We always have a liturgy in the morning. You should eat something early in the day on Saturdays. But we don't have it as a rest day. We work on Saturday. We have rest day on Sunday because it's a resurrection. We go to the church, etc. But we don't keep the Sabbath as a day of rest. Following Christ's example, it's not about working on the day. We mustn't use unleavened bread and other Jewish things. We've put aside the customs of the old law. We keep the morality in the higher level than everything like that. But some of the little customs which are leading us to Christ, but are fulfilled in Christ, we don't need to continue them now. So this is a canon basically just to say we don't follow Jewish things, but should be Jews in accordance with their and basically just keeping a certain distance from them. We must remember, just keep away from Jewish customs and practices. Right, Canon 9. It's just basically all things written against icons, or little books and stuff. We shouldn't be sort of keeping hold of books that are opposed to icons or opposed to heresy, of trying to teach us heresies and stuff. We should put them aside and things like that. So we shouldn't be secretly keeping them, because that might show a secret interest of us to be interested in this heresy or supporting the heresy. So that's just one of that. The Canon 9 is about that sort of thing and how to manage that. Next one, Canon 10, is again just one we've repeated before. You're not allowed to go, I can't just abandon this parish and go off somewhere else. You've got to stick to the parish, or you're a priest, etc. And the clergy, the reader, Felix needs to sort of stick here. Now, if for some reason there's necessity to move off, or somebody that agree with the bishop, you can move on. But generally, a priest should be, and a clergyman should be in their parish from their ordination till they die. It's a basic expectation. There are times that you need to move and need to be released, etc. But you shouldn't be doing that flimsily or just on my own will. I must always do it with the bishop. Having said that, the bishop shouldn't be moving priests around randomly either. They both should mutual consent for need, of course, but neither should be the priest is going where he wants, or the bishop just send around. Because if the bishop's doing that, he's undermining the stability principle. And he shouldn't be undermining that by just shipping priests everywhere. They should be stable, and he should be acting in the way that reinforces that, not undermines that. And therefore not, to do anything without permission of the bishop, etc. Right. And you're not to use civil authorities to be on your side on these sort of matters. Right. The Canon 11, just to reinforce the first part, all of us being obliged to keep the divine canons, we ought to maintain by all means inviolable the one saying that should be stewards in every church. So in every church, when we talk about a diocese in this case, there should be a steward. So the bishop has authority over all the finance of the church. Ideally, all the buildings should be owned by the bishop. All the finances we should send money to the bishop, who redistributes it to pay the priests, etc. It's not so good that the parish pays their priests. This is sort of a lay sort of control. Really, the money should go to the bishop, who pays it out and can coordinate these things. But the bishop, for safeguarding and protection, he must have a steward. So there's no doubt that he's taking money for himself and things. You have a steward there who overchecks, double checks everything the bishop. So the bishop has the ultimate authority in spending the money, but the steward makes sure that everything is done appropriately for right things. He keeps track of all records and stuff. So we must never just have one guy looking after it. And then in a parish, once you have a certain income, it's always good to have a treasurer or something with the presbyter, so that the money is accountability and how it's spent and how it's used. And stuff like that. So that's what that canon is saying. And the steward should be usually a presbyter who's working on it. It's not a lay person that's there. It's one of the presbyters. Right. 13, Canon 12, sorry. If a abbot, abbots and bishops are not allowed to take the money of their diocese or their monastery for their own personal private use, or sending off to cousins or aunties and uncles and illegitimate sons and daughters sort of thing, and spending money like this. No, it needs to be kept account, and what's church property is church property, and it's not to be used elsewhere. We can get in trouble if you can't come in and take candles off the church. Like if we have the candles at the back, you're not allowed to take them and go home and use them for your dinner candles or something like that. Once they're given for church, if oil's been used for church for lamps and stuff, you're not allowed to take it and just go and light your own, pour it on your dinner or something the other night. Once it's offered to the church, it belongs to a church, and you shouldn't be using it for personal, private usage. It's got to be used for the right purposes. So that's what that canon is about. There's more details about it, but it's just enough to say that's the point of it. In view of the fact this is canon 13, this one is basically once a church, in particular monastery, has been consecrated, it should stay as such forever. You're not allowed to turn monastery into a tourist resort, into baths, into private homes, and things like that, which happens a lot nowadays. This is not right. A church and a monastery should be such for life, and you shouldn't be used for other purposes. Of course, occasionally it's unavoidable. You just simply can't maintain it. It's going to fall. But better to let the church fall down than to be given for some other purpose, and particularly monastery. So that's that one there. We shouldn't be using it for another purpose. Right. 14. Now, this is one that is I'm fairly strong on. It is perfectly plain that everyone's order reigns in the church, and it is pleasing to God for transactions of the priesthood to be maintained with rigorousness. So things to do with a priesthood, with laity, for example, there's sins and, whether they keep a fast, this or do that. We have a lot of tolerance for the weakness of humanity and stuff, but when it comes to the priesthood, who's been ordained for who's been assigned here, there's no need for tolerance in these things. It should be kept much more stricter order of things. And because it's not dependent on their passions in such a way, it's a matter of bishop making sure they're keeping good order in the churches. So in this particular one, since it's behold, some peoples receiving the tonsure of clergy from infancy, so they take their children and they do a monastic tonsure. So, or clerical tonsure, which is a bald patch on top of your head. That is a proper tonsure. Nowadays, most of our priests will wear long hair like hermits, but properly you have the top of your hair cut off. That's a proper clerical tonsure. They were doing it as children without being actually ordained as readers of clergy, and they were reading from their pulpit. So lay people are not allowed to. That's why Felix is up there, where it's the Felonian, etc. He's ordained to be the chancellor of the church. The laymen are not allowed to be up doing that. It's not a lay task. It's a clerical task. And so you must have a proper ordination to be reading the divine words, etc. That's distinct from singing Lord have mercy, Amen, and a few hymns during liturgy where we could sing more as a whole congregation together. Those are lay hymns. But with the psalm verses, the readings of the Old Testament, a lot of chanting the psalms, like during matins, and reading the epistles. This is a clerical task. These are divine words, and they need to be ordained clergy to do this. So this one is just basically saying that no one is allowed to do that unless they have been properly ordained. And also for monks and monasteries, they are to be ordained to do these tasks as well.
Father, and what's the meaning of that cutting the hair on the top? What is the...
I don't know all the depth of the symbolic meaning of it. It's like a cutting of a sacrifice. When we get baptized, you get an offering to God as well. It may be as simply partly an offering, but it's a symbol to identify the clerics from the lay people. So when they depose, you have to grow your hair long again, grow it out again. You're not to keep the tonsure on your head. So it's a way of people identifying who's a clergyman and who's not. So it could be simple as that. So, but there may be a lot more mystical interpretations of that and meanings of it. There's probably 4 or 5 different ones. I don't know all those ones for you, sorry to not know that. But it is partly to distinguish the clergy from the laity. And because a lot of priests grow their hair long, it is actually better for laymen now not to grow their hair in a long ponytail thing like a priesthood, so that you have a distinct haircut from the priesthood. It's not absolutely forbidden, but we need to be aware of this, that the priests wear their hair one way and the laymen wear their hair another way, and you should have this distinction. And so even an abbot is actually, interestingly, a monastery is almost like a small diocese. So when I'm a servant in a parish church, you'll see that Greek priests will bow to the bishop's throne outside, because I can only serve with the consent of the bishop. Now, I don't go rushing to him every day and ask consent for each service, but in principle, I only serve with his consent. I can't serve of my own will. If he says, no, I can't serve, I stop. In the monasteries, the presbyters in the monastery don't go to the bishop for that consent, they go to the abbot. The abbot gives them the consent to serve. He doesn't ordain them, but the consent to serve is the abbot's. And here, the abbot, because he's almost like a little diocese in itself, he can actually ordain readers and stuff for his monastery, only for a monastery, not outside, but just for his monastery he can ordain them. So an abbot is almost 50% of the way towards being a bishop, because of the nature of the monastery in there. So this is an interesting understanding.
So only readers, nobody else?
It just says readers and chanters, or readers here it says. Some argue maybe subdeacons may be able to, but it's not said in this canon as such, but certainly not deacons, presbyters and stuff. It has to be the bishop who does that. Nuns are exception where the women, when they are apart from men, they can't have the clerical orders of being readers, etc. So they do some of these functions just as nuns, but only in the context of their convent, apart from the men sort of thing. They do this as a sort of an exception to the rule. But otherwise, the monks need to follow the same rule as in the church. 15 is a clergyman is not allowed to be attached to 2 churches, because often when you attach to a church, you get a stipend from that. You're not allowed to take 2 churches and get money from 2 churches. You should be just dedicated to one temple and with a stipend from that.
In Slovakia, there is a custom when the village is too small, the priest has like 2-3 small villages.
Yeah, that by necessity that is the case, and generally we just have to do the best you can. Now, when you say attached to 2 churches, was definitely not meaning you're not allowed to be. I can't be a priest of a diocese of Antioch here, nor and in the Russian diocese at the same time. I can't be under 2 dioceses and attached to both of us. That's definitely. We're having to look after, manage 2 parishes. Okay, that's more common that you need to be doing. Ideally, not really. You should be just attached to the one place. But you certainly can't be sort of acting as a priest for 2 dioceses. No, the priest is contained within the diocese, and you cannot be a priest as he moves from one into the other. He can never straddle them both. So that's basically the main part of that canon. Right, every luxury and adornment of the body is alien to the sacerdotal order. Bishops or clergymen, therefore, who adorn themselves with splendid and conspicuous clothes need to be corrected. That's why we tend to wear black cassocks, etc., and we don't walk around in beautiful, big, luxurious clothes like kings and things like that. There are some exceptions to this in the past, but no, it's not for us to be. We need to be keeping a fairly plain and simple thing. Even though in the services we look like glorious peacocks riding around with our vestments, when I'm walking around outside, I should wear cassocks and plain, simple clothes. We shouldn't be dressing up in fancy garments. So that's Canon 16 with various extra bits. Canon 17. Some monks, after leaving their monasteries, become imbued with learning to rule and a loathsomeness to obey. They make their own prayer houses and try to finish them. So basically, if I'm a monk, you stay in your monastery. If you leave, and you're not to be supported in doing things outside and trying to rule your own place. 18, if all right, yes, it's the unoffending even to outsiders, says the apostle. For this one is women to be expelled from bishoprics and monasteries to cause everyone taking offence. So women are allowed to live in the bishop's house or in the monasteries and stuff like that. That can cause offence. So they're just saying, right, it's quite often some of them like a woman to help cleaning and cooking and all these sorts of things, but it can cause scandal and stuff. So they are told to be put out. They're allowed to have like a bishop's mother maybe there, and that doesn't cause any problems, things like that. So it's more unmarried, single women and stuff. It's the one. And occasionally, if they, like in the diocese in Greece, married women coming in to help do some cooking and stuff, but they're not living there. They come in just through the day and go out or help at work in the office occasionally. It's not such a problem. But yeah, living in there and etc. It's not good. Number 19. On the headman of a church, the hatred of avarice or greed has been abated to such an extent that even some of the men and women called reverend, having forgotten the Lord's commandment, have deceived or misled into allowing the admission for money of those joining this. Oh, again, this is using money for become monks or priests, etc. That's again just a no-no. And so it's done that 3 times in this canon. Canon 20, this one forbids double monasteries. That we're not to have monks and nuns in the same monastery or in the same property. They need to be kept distinct. There's a certain monastery nearby which has sort of done that, which is not actually the best thing. They did it for reasons which is sort of trying to be a little bit pious, so we mustn't judge them too quickly. And it was a custom in the Britain to have these double monasteries. But the canon actually forbids to do this because it can be a cause of scandal and problems. So they should have the monastery men over here and the women's monastery should be sufficiently far away that it's kept distinct. I think that our monastery nearby is working harder and harder to bring a better separation, but it does affect it. It is properly against contrary to the canon. We leave it as an economy on the particular case. Then let no monk have a liberty to address a nun or a nun to address a monk with a view of speaking in private. No monk look into a nunnery, monks and nuns should be kept at a reasonable distance from each other, and for good purpose. It can be quite dangerous if they... Right, Canon 21, a monk or nun must not leave his monastery or nunnery respectively and go away to another. If it occurs again, one of the important things of Christian life is stability. And as I said, the priest should stay in his parish, the bishop in his diocese. When you get married, the husband and wife is stable. You're stuck with that person and you should stay with them for the rest of your life. And also a monk or nun. When you go to a monastery, you're stable. They talk about obedience, chastity, and lack of money, or poverty. But they forget stability is all monastic things is also part. So once you go to one, you're there for life. You should stay. And it's a very important part of our Christian life to be in stable relationships, stable places, because that points to our eternity. We're stably with God. We don't move around from God outside into heaven, back into heaven, and there's no this. We are there eternally and stably. So we need to learn to be stable in our relationships in the earth, so we're prepared for the eternal stability of the age to come. Well, it's not a matter of just time and space are coming in and out of these, but no, we're stuck with it. So we need to learn to be with relationships, to stick with them through. So unless there's some very massive problem that forces us to have to break away from that relationship, like heresy or something like that, where you're no longer, that relationship's helping us to come to God, but it's driving us away. And finally, 22 of... everything is to be dedicated to God and not to be slavishly subject to one's own will is undoubtedly a great thing itself. Eating or drinking, the divine apostles say you do everything for the glory of God, whether eating or drinking. Therefore our God gospel is ordered us to cut out the origin of sin. So this one here is... Sorry, I'm just taking a moment. It's quite long, these canons. And a lot of them, they just go through all the beginning part. Oh yes, in this one here, those who've taken a priesthood life shouldn't be eating privately in the company of women, unless it be somewhere together with God-bearing and other men and women. Banquet itself, so that's one here. And in the case of relatives too, they're to let him do the same. So yes, just that one there is just to make sure that we keep away from potentials of things that can lead to things that are not appropriate. And that is it for the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And I think we'll do that for now for the canons. We might do local canons at some other time, but I'll move on to other topics for now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.